Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. This week's case was suggested by listener, friend, and fellow podcaster Lorraine Purdon. She is the host of Once Upon a Nightmare, a podcast that discusses horror films. I was on her show recently reviewing the 1991 film Cape Fear, which I had never seen before and thoroughly enjoyed. You all should go have a listen. Anyways, back to today's case, Lorraine asked me to cover serial killer Jeffrey Mailhot. With the majority of killers I've covered, the perpetrator showed signs of violence in their early life. For example, bullying, arson, assault, or cruelty to animals. But Jeffrey hadn't demonstrated any of this behavior. He was noted as being a really nice kid, quiet but polite. Jeffrey Mailhot was born November 9th, 1970 in Cumberland, Rhode Island. It was as far north in Rhode Island as you could get, bordering Massachusetts. Jeff had one sibling, a sister. His family later moved to Lincoln, Rhode Island, a town split from the neighboring town of Smithfield in 1871 and named after President Abraham Lincoln. At age 9, his parents divorced. This can be a very difficult thing for a child to experience. Divorce can increase the risk for mental health problems in children and adolescents. Studies have found that depression and anxiety rates are higher in children from divorced parents. But let's be honest, the divorce rate is pretty high these days, and many children make it through without becoming serial killers. Hard to know with which parent, but Jeff moved to Woonsocket, Rhode Island, as he was entering high school. To give you an idea, Woonsocket is about 50 miles south of Boston, Massachusetts. Not long after the move, tragedy struck the Mailhot family. When Jeff was just 17 years old, his mother died, and sadly, his father passed away just 5 years later. Both lost their lives to lung cancer. I realize at 22 years old you are technically an adult, but the thought of 22-year-old me without any parental guidance would have been so devastating. I mean, I'm 35 and I still call my parents for advice on the regular. I can only imagine what he felt after losing both of his parents. According to the JAMA and Archives Journal, children who have a parent that died are 3 times at the risk of depression than those who have 2 living parents, along with an increased risk for post-traumatic stress disorder. The fact that Jeff's father passed just 5 years after the loss of his mother had to cause major psychological distress. But if he had any mental health issues after the divorce or death of his parents, he didn't let it show. As a young adult, Jeff was on his own renting an apartment in Woonsocket. There were 4 apartments available in his building. 2 units were vacant, just Jeff and an elderly woman who lived in the building. The elderly woman passed away, leaving Jeff as the one and only tenant in the whole building. Jeff's landlord described him as a nice, quiet boy who always paid his rent on time. He had a job working as a machine operator at a company called Promo Technologies. He never missed a day of work and was described as an excellent employee. Jeff set out to create an identity for himself, buying a Harley and sporting a leather jacket. He was a big fan of wrestling, well, the WWE kind, if you can call it that. So Jeff started lifting weights in an attempt to bulk up like the wrestlers he watched and admired on TV. He was short, stocky, but muscular, 5'3" and 170 pounds. He started hanging out at the local pubs on Arnold Street around the corner from his apartment. His favorite thing to do was sing karaoke at the sports bar called Box Seats. Unfortunately, even when singing in front of a crowd, he wasn't memorable. The manager of Box Seats said Jeff mostly hung out in the back corner alone, and his performances didn't stand out to him. You remember the good ones, and definitely the bad ones, but Jeff Mailhot was unremarkable. Your average Joe. Arnold Street, where Jeff liked to hang out, was a bit sketchy. There was the typical stumbling drunk leaving the pub, as well as drug use, dealings, and prostitution. I know the term prostitution seems politically incorrect these days. I'll be honest, prostitute, hooker, sex worker, call girl, I'm not sure what the right term is. A woman who trades sex for money. By the age of 33, Jeff was spending his weekends bringing home sex workers, which later was a surprise to everyone who knew him. The fact is, Jeff had a secret life that no one knew about. He came off as a responsible, quiet, polite guy, but in reality, he was a monster. Jeff was really rough with the working girls. For example, quite a few of the girls on Arnold Street came forward claiming to be put in a chokehold by Jeff. He would let go right before they passed out and then ask them to leave. But that didn't keep these women away. They did what it took to bring in cash, given the corner they worked, most likely to support their drug habit. One evening in February of 2003, Jeff met 33-year-old Audrey Harris at a strip club and drove her home in his Chevy Blazer. Like others before her, once inside his apartment, he put Audrey in a chokehold. But this time, he didn't let go. He kept her there until she stopped breathing. Remember, he was the only tenant in his whole apartment building, so no one heard her cries for help. This was Jeff's first kill, and he wasn't sure what to do next. He was pretty intoxicated and decided to sleep it off and figure things out in the morning. Well, he woke up the next day and realized he had no game plan for disposal of this woman's body. He had fantasized about this for a long time, but the act was somewhat spontaneous. He wrapped her body up in a rug and placed her in his Blazer. After driving around looking for a place to dump her body, he realized it was way too risky. Jeff spent 2 days pondering what to do. He was watching an episode of The Sopranos when inspiration hit. He went to the hardware store and bought a handsaw. He used the saw to dismember Audrey Harris's body, just like he watched the characters do on TV. He placed her body parts into multiple garbage bags, waited until dark, and drove around the area, dropping bags in different dumpsters all over town. The fact that he murdered another human being did not have any effect on him. He went about his normal routine as if nothing happened. Jeff went an entire year before he attacked another sex worker. It was February 15th, 2004, Tess Morris's birthday. She wanted to go out and have some fun. Tess was standing at the bar when she hears a male voice behind her say, "Put your money away, I'll buy you a beer." Tess said he looked like an everyday man. They ended up back at his house. She asked where she could find a napkin, and he pointed to a drawer. When she opened the drawer, he grabbed her neck and put her in a headlock that got tighter and tighter. Tess said, quote, "I couldn't get him off my neck. I couldn't get air. I'm grabbing at his eyes. I push all the way back and bend his back on the stove. I went back with a lot of force. And I'm begging. I'm screaming, 'Please, my daughter. I gotta see my daughter.' He dragged me towards the door and said, 'If I ever see you outside again, I'll kill you.'" Unquote. She went to the police and filed a report against him, which I admire because most sex workers would not. Given that their line of work is illegal, they typically steer clear of law enforcement. But this would be the opportunity for Jeffrey Mailhot to be arrested and potentially save the lives of 2 other women. But nothing came of the report. His next victim, 42-year-old Christine Dumont, was picked up in his Chevy Blazer and brought back to his apartment. She was placed into a chokehold until she took her last breath. Honestly, I'm not even sure he had sex with these women first or if he just brought them home and choked them. His last crime went unnoticed, so Jeff did the exact same thing, dismembered her body with a saw in his bathtub, and disposed of multiple garbage bags thrown around town. The reason Jeff chose sex workers is because their disappearances tend to go unreported. But Christine Dumont's family noticed when she went missing. They reported it to the police, and sometimes cases involving sex workers are not taken seriously and brushed under the rug. But in this case, there were uncashed disability checks in her name, And let's be honest, someone who's trading sex for money isn't going to let checks go uncashed. She was missing and police suspected foul play. Jeffrey Mailhot is a serial killer. We know that much. But that doesn't mean he was good at it. He had another failed attempt with sex worker Jocelyn Martel. Luckily for Jocelyn, she knew how to defend herself. When Jeff attempted to strangle her, she writhed free from his grasp and headbutted him, then grabbed his head and pressed her thumbs into his eye sockets, knocking him on his ass. Jocelyn ran as fast as she could out of the apartment. These failed attempts did not deter Jeff from trying again. He picked up 24-year-old Stacy Goulet at a fireworks show in Woonsocket. Stacy was a known sex worker in the area. He had seen her around Arnold Street. He drove Stacy to his apartment where he strangled her and dismembered her body. By this point, police are aware that sex workers in the area have gone missing. Their bodies have not yet been discovered. So they don't know there's a serial killer, just that women are missing. An anonymous tip was called into police telling them that they should speak with Jocelyn Martel. If you remember earlier, I mentioned she was the one who kicked his ass and got away. She wasn't hard to find. Jocelyn was actually in jail at the time on a parole violation. Police questioned her about the missing women. She didn't know any of them, but she did share her experience with the short, stocky blonde guy that attempted to strangle her. Both Tese Morris and Jocelyn Martel were able to pick out Jeff Mailhot from a lineup. Jeff was arrested for the assaults of both women and taken into custody. While in jail, he was questioned about the 3 missing women. He played dumb, claimed he had never picked up a sex worker in his life. After hours of interrogation, he finally admitted to bringing home a working girl, but when investigators showed pictures of the missing women, he said, quote, "I don't know these girls. I never killed anybody." The investigators responded, "I don't know if anyone in these pictures has been killed, but they are missing." This comment by Jeff Mailhot led police to believe they had their man. Tiny slip-ups like this can be huge in cracking the case. They brought up the loss of his parents, saying, quote, "You know they had proper burials, that they're in consecrated ground. The family of these girls can't mourn and say goodbye. They'll have to live with that the rest of their lives, or until we get to the bottom of this." He laid out the photos of the 3 women one more time and asked, "What happened here, Jeff? You pushed it too far? Things got out of hand?" Jeff Mailhot nodded, folding under pressure. Over the next few hours, Jeff sobbed as he confessed his crimes. He said he didn't know why he did it. There was no real reason. He explained he got his thrill from trapping the victims. When he closed his apartment door behind him, that's what gave him the rush. He admitted to the murders and how he disposed of the 3 women's bodies. Jeff's apartment was taped off and searched. He was a very tidy guy. I'm kind of jealous of his organization skills. Even his socks were arranged in a line separated by color. CDs and DVDs in alphabetical order on his shelf. I don't believe he had a formal diagnosis, but it sounds as if he was a bit OCD. Those who knew Jeff said he kept certain things in his right pocket and left pocket at all times. He often took out his wallet to make sure his paper money was all facing in the same direction and lined up perfectly. Investigators stated, quote, "We opened up the cupboards and it almost looked like he'd taken a ruler and measured the distance between the glasses. Everything was size-coded, color-coded, alphabetized. It was just super orderly," unquote. The bathroom is where he did the dismemberment. Saw marks could be seen on the tub. When they sprayed luminol, the room lit up like Christmas. There were remnants of blood from all 3 victims. Security footage showed Jeff Mailhot buying saws at the local hardware store. This was an open and shut case. Investigators searched the local landfill for 10 days before discovering the remains of Stacy Goulet and the saw used to dismember her. Unfortunately, the remains of Audrey Harris and Christine Dumont were never found. Jeffrey Mailhot was charged with 3 counts of murder, 1 count of assault in an attempt to commit murder, and 1 count of felony assault. In February of 2006, Jeffrey Mailhot pleaded guilty to all charges against him. He was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 10 years. Not sure why it isn't 3 life terms for 3 murders, but he will be eligible for parole in 2047. He will be 77 years old. Jocelyn Martell attended his trial and had this to say, quote, "The reason I went out of my way is because if the shoe was on the other foot, I'm sure the girls would have done the same for me. Even though we all had drug problems, we all had families and moms that loved us. I felt like I had an obligation because I got away, like I had reason. God did what he did for a reason," unquote. Every single person who knew Jeff Mailhot was completely dumbfounded to learn that he was actually a serial killer. To quote an article by John Larrabee and Russ Olivo in the Rhode Island Monthly, "They melt into the world like average nobodies, their dark secrets hidden by a mask of normalcy. They go to work, pay their bills, maybe relax with a beer now and then. They have friends who think they know them, but the only folks who really do are dead. According to some experts, 30 to 50 serial killers may be prowling the United States at any one time," unquote. Now that's a terrifying thought. If you are enjoying the show, please jump on Apple Podcasts and leave a written review or a rating on Spotify. Keep sending those story suggestions to KillerStoriesPodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at Killer Story Pod. Don't forget to go listen to my recent collab with Lorraine on Once Upon a Nightmare. I'll have the link for you in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been a Killer Story.